Although nowadays the majority of Canadians is white, the country has spent thousands of years under the rule of a different race. These were the original inhabitants of North America. Over the centuries, these people, also known as Indians, lived in small groups spread throughout Canada. The groups developed over the centuries to an organized society with their own culture. When European settlers arrived in the 16th century, the inhabitants of North America were often removed from their home and villages by a war. Most of them were threatened with violence and were then sent to remote areas where they could not get in the way of the European colonization. Scared and amazed by the European technology and very sensitive for the European diseases, the majority of the original population died. The Europeans used people to work as soldiers, hunters, or fur traders. For strategic and economic reasons, the British were interested in claiming an area north of New France. In 1617, after a path to North America through the north was discovered, said England is owner of the entire northern coast of the continent. In contrast to the 13 many countries, gave Great Britain her the power to Hudson's Bay Company. Controlling so many countries gave the Hudson Bay Company enormous wealth and political power, and gradually started to work as a private empire, largely independent of the British government. In the early colonial period, the French and English colonial had a conflict based on the killing of animals and selling their skins to Europe, where they made two heads imperial companies and sold them to wealthier people. This was known as the fur trade, and there was soon a huge rivalry between the French and English companies, who both wanted to conquer more and more of North America. The British colonies had access to more soldiers, but the majority of the native tribes chose the side of the French. A series of unexpected French attacks on the British caused an early British defeat, which prompted the British to import thousands of troops from Europe in order to win. The Treaty of Paris in 1763, which ended the war, was devastating from a French perspective. Very New France and most of Louisiana were given to England. The remaining pieces went to Spain. The French dominion in North America was after a long time terminated. Until then, the Canadian colonies are very authoritarian governments. Although a small amount of elected parliaments were introduced in the colonies, and 1700, all real power remained in the hands of the governors appointed by the British. This was fine when the colonies were filled with farmers and fur traders, but in 1820, Canada was getting bigger and richer, and there came a more diverse society. A growing population and economic growth led to a growing middle class consisting of people like traders, carpenters, and doctors who all wanted a voice on how their colony was administered. In the year 1830, Canada came in a period with a lot of political turmoil. A group of reformers, led by mostly French and Catholic middle classes, were against corruption of the so-called Family Compact. What the reformers wanted was very varied. Some wanted only a government such as that of Great Britain. Others went much farther and wanted that Canada would join the United States. The reformers held several small armed rebellions. They moved to the street with weapons and burned buildings. The riots were easily knocked down. The leaders of the reform groups were jailed and then were hanged or banished. In the middle 19th century, Britain was more concerned with expanding its empire in India and Asia, and began to lose his interest in Canada. This gave the Canadian the right to politician with their own solution to their political problems to come. And by 1860, all remaining North American colonies of England transformed into one self-government. This would give the colonies better economic and military power. Canada's first Prime Minister was a drink addict named John Macdonald, who as a leading political negotiator had served in the government of the United Province. Macdonald, a man with a great ambition and vision, wanted a much larger Canada than he had gotten. and he was on his way to the borders to extend in all directions. By then, the fur trade was as good as gone, and in 1868 the once powerful Hudson Bay Company agreed to give their power over their countries in North America to MacDonald. These new countries, which more than doubled the size of Canada, were baptized in the Industrial Revolution, which led to a dramatic growth of factory labor in the city. The natural sources of Canada were now processed into useful products such as wood, textiles, and meat, creating all kinds of new jobs for people from the farm and out of the wood. A large influx of immigrants intended to uninhabited parts of the Canadian West helped to establish the ethnic composition of the country. No longer there were just French and English people, but a large number of Canadians were Irish, Italian, Polish, Scandinavian, or Dutch. The 10 years between 1906 and 1916, when Canada welcomed 2 million new inhabitants, is until this day still the largest population growth in the country.